Hello, and welcome to Cutting Through, where we present analysis of foreign policy and domestic politics that cuts through the noise of corporate and ideologically driven media. I'm Mitchell Plitnick, the president of Rethinking Foreign Policy and the author of the Cutting Through newsletter on Substack. You can subscribe to Cutting Through at mitchellplitnick.substack.com, where you can also become a paid subscriber or donate to support this work. Anything you can do to help me continue doing this work will be deeply appreciated. You can also share Cutting Through with your friends and contacts and help promote this work in that way. Well, it is the day after Election Day here in the United States, and it is not a good day for most people with some sort of decent human values, I would say. As Donald Trump has, unfortunately, not all that surprisingly, won this election. The atmosphere, I think, is very similar to the one in 2016. I think people, again, were not paying attention to what was going on, instead coming up with a lot of sort of cutesy aphorisms and jingoistic sayings, ignoring things. This this situation was actually fairly predictable. I'm not saying that I was sure that Trump was going to win. I was pretty convinced of it a few weeks ago. In the few days leading up to the election, I started thinking that there was maybe more of a chance that Harris could pull it out. But for one of the things that people love to talk about is how the polls don't mean anything. The polls don't mean the polls actually do mean something if you know how to look at them. If you look at one poll, so many people may be aware that there was a poll that came out of Iowa from a very solid. I look at polls all the time, even when it's not election season. So I know the various pollsters and I know their reputations, and this was a very solid pollster, a very reputable one, and it showed Harris winning Iowa by 3 points. I immediately told everyone I knew who was getting excited about that poll, uh, that in my view, Harris had absolutely no chance of winning Iowa, and I don't care what the poll said. Any one poll, no matter how well constructed, no matter how good it is, any one poll can be way off. What you do is you look at aggregates, and you look at multiple different polls. You don't trace one poll for every day for a month and see where that goes, because you're just seeing the biases inherent in that polling firm confirmed day after day. This is how you do that. And if you did that during this election, you could see it was quite visible. You could see the momentum that Harris had built up when she first got in the race. You could see exactly when it stopped, and you could see when she really got into danger of losing. This was not an unpredictable loss. Again, someone asked me, a friend asked me the morning of the election, how do you think it's going to go? And I said, anybody who tells you they know how this is going to come out is lying. And I think that was true. The polls were way too close. They had really not varied much. Close polls tend to favor Donald Trump because Trump voters tend to be undercounted, whereas Democratic voters tend to be overcounted, because one of the things that happens is that these polls talk to voters that may or may not show up to the polls that day. They think they will, and the ones who are discouraged don't show up because they're demotivated. Those people are answering pollsters saying who they're planning to vote for. And so that's one of the things that happens on the Trump undercount. It's usually because the MAGA being MAGA, they don't trust pollsters. They just want to be difficult and not answer the pollsters, whatever it may be. But that's this is what has been my experience in looking over polls and watching polls for over 20 years. They're not worthless like some would like you to believe, but you do have to pay specific attention, and you have to learn with experience which polls are more trustworthy, how you do it, and you really have to dedicate yourself to following them over the long term, because any moment in time is really meaningless. It tells you only what's happening at that particular moment in time. So unless that's election day, it's a snapshot of nothing that really means anything. It's just one data point among many. Anyway, um, so uh, it wasn't surprising. It was disappointing. Not that I am any fan of Harris. I am willing to disclose that I did not vote for Harris. I certainly didn't vote for Trump. But being in Maryland, I felt quite certain that I could vote for another candidate, and it was not the Green Party candidate. I voted for a writing candidate. Um, but I felt like I could do that and didn't matter. And indeed, this was the case. Maryland was, almost as soon as the polls closed, it was called for Harris, as I knew it would be. Um, and again, I'll be honest. If I had lived in Pennsylvania, I live an hour away or so from Pennsylvania. If I lived in Pennsylvania, I probably, almost certainly, would have voted for Harris. That's how I approached it. I wasn't telling anyone else how to vote, but um, so I was as 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 negative as I feel towards Harris. I mean, this is a woman who is deeply, deeply complicit in genocide, whose politics are really fairly atrocious. She's abandoned most of the good positions she once had. There are some issues on which I do think she would have been good, um, particularly regarding the trans non-binary communities, LGBTQIA issues in general. I think she would have been good. Women's issues, I think she probably would have been, well, certainly would have been a lot better than Trump. And I think she probably would have been good on those as well. But there's nothing there to make me say, oh, woe is us that we can't have a Kamala Harris presidency. She most certainly would have continued some awful and bloody foreign policies. So I'm not missing that. Um, Connected to this, just I'll let you know that I've written a fairly in-depth post-mortem on the Harris campaign that I think goes into a pretty good deep dive analysis of what went wrong and why we now are looking at 4 more years of Donald Trump. I will link to that article below this video. I also recently published a piece at Middle East Eye that talked about what I believe a Trump Middle East policy is going to look like, and I will link to that as well. And I should be publishing in the next day or two an article at mondoweiss.net talking about the role the Palestine and the rest of the Middle East played in this election. So if you follow me on social media or anything like that, you can watch for that. Um, in this video, I want to talk about how we move forward from here. And I think the first thing is that we start with that honest assessment that I'm talking about. Now, I won't go into that because you can go ahead and read the article I wrote, again, the link below. But I think it is important that that is the first step. And when I say honest assessment, that means if we were wrong about something, if I was wrong about something, if you were wrong about something, more importantly, if the Democratic leadership was wrong about something and they were wrong about just about everything, you have to be willing to admit it. Say, I made a mistake, um, and move on, correct it, make room for someone else, whatever you need to do. But you have to be accountable to that mistake. Um, Once that assessment is done, we can start thinking about how do we strategize to move forward. And I think we all need to we'll obviously have many, many different assessments, but let's be careful and just toss out the ones that are clearly self-serving, and then by this I mean the ones that you're going to see on most of the mainstream media. We've already seen mainstream so-called Democratic pundits pulling out their hair saying, this election was lost because Kamala went too far to the left, which is absurd. Kamala did not go to the left at all. In fact, she tacked to the right. She openly embraced Republicans. Some of the most far right ones, Liz Cheney, who some people seem to think is a moderate simply because she doesn't want to see Trump become a dictator. Liz Cheney voted with Trump 93% of the time when she was in Congress. She likes Trumpism. She doesn't like Trump. That's the only real saving grace about it, is that she doesn't happen to like Donald Trump. I mean, let's not even talk about the crimes her father committed, which sadly, are being challenged, and there seems to be a competition now in the Biden administration to say, "Hey, we can do war crimes too, just like good old Dick." Um, that was a terrible idea to embrace the Cheneys. It was a terrible idea to try and show how to try and say that she was going to have some token Republican in her cabinet. Um, Having that sort of outreach to the right, one could argue that there's value in it. I would argue there isn't, and in fact, I do in this article argue that there is no value in it because I think all those voters are locked up already. But but even if you're going to argue that there has to be a concomitant outreach to the left and to the progressives. The people who Joe Biden won with. And there wasn't that. And I think that speaks to the power of progressive voters. Look, I don't want to overstate this, and I think we, as progressives, sometimes get confused with between a progressive movement and people who have progressive views on particular policies. So we know that progressive policies, living wage, Medicare for all, we can go through a whole host of them. Obviously, ceasefire in Gaza. These are very popular among Democrats, but actually very popular quite broadly among the entire electorate. We know that that is true. That is not the same as a progressive movement, as a community of progressives, particularly of progressives who believe in radical change. We are not the majority, and that's okay. That's actually okay. We're not the majority, but we do have significant power. It is the lack of outreach to this community, to us, that played a major role. I'm not going to say it cost Harris the election, but it played a major role in Harris's loss here. And we need to use that power. We need to be smart about it. We need to find ways to leverage that power to shift U.S. politics towards a direction of addressing real issues in substantive ways. Part of the appeal of Donald Trump, part of the reason that he gets people, let's face it, and let's be frank about it, he gets people to vote against their own, certainly economic interests, possibly, in his racism, because he's so fueled by white people. He gets people to vote for their social or identity, or if you prefer racial interests, but certainly their economic. Most of the people who vote for Trump are working people. They are not voting for their own economic interests, and yet they continue to do it. And the reason is that he convinces them that they're not doing that. That's always been the way Republicans have operated, but Trump has brought in a populism in that regard that is very new to the Republican Party, and very effective, and really shows a major hole in Democratic strategy. And the answer to that hole, the way you fill that hole, the way you address that issue, is by appealing to progressives. Look, this isn't a revolutionary idea. A very conservative Democrat named Joe Biden recognized this very truth 4 years ago. He decided to reach out to progressives. He made deals with Bernie Sanders. Most of the positive things in Biden's term, certainly when it came to labor, Biden's never been a friend of labor. But in his 4 years, he did do some good things regarding labor, particularly in terms of the appointments to the National Labor Relations Board, which had real impact on unions' ability to fight for workers' rights and for higher wages and et cetera. And if putting Sanders into advantageous positions, there were a number of gains that were made. He didn't do that because he suddenly channeled the spirit of Eugene Debs. He did it because he knew that that was how he was going to win in 2020, because he, unlike Harris, has been playing this game for 50 years, and he knows whether he's got all his faculties or not. He has done this for a long time, and he knew that that's what he needed to do to win, and he did it. Unfortunately, as we saw, and it was the same story in 2016, Harris, like Clinton, tacked to the right, tried to appeal to Republican voters who were already either going to vote for her or were never going to vote for her. And in doing so, she really threw progressives under the bus in ways that I think even Clinton didn't do. Her the most obvious was her treatment of advocates for Palestinian rights. But that wasn't the only one. I mean, she really disregarded progressives in general, and she was backed in that because her base liked what she was doing. They felt that she was going to save them from Trump, was the really good alternative. She was running a campaign of joy, and they liked it. And she thought that was going to work. Turns out, just like in 2016, ignoring the progressives and not bringing them out to vote means they don't come out to vote, and you don't get the turnout you need to defeat Donald Trump. Joe Biden, for all his faults, and they are many, knew better. We need to recognize this power that progressives have. We need to recognize it. We need to think strategically about it. We need to not overstate it. I do think we are a key constituency, and I think that we have shown in 2016 and 2020. Again, this is not just about Palestine, and I want to stress that because you guys who follow me know that that's my main issue. But this is about the progressive movement broadly. Progressives who have felt alienated first by Hillary Clinton and then by Kamala Harris. This is that key constituency that needs to get motivated in future elections in order for Democrats to win. That that constituency was motivated in 2020. It was also motivated, incidentally, in 2022. That was unfortunately that was when reproductive rights was the spur that brought out progressives, and I think Democrats thought that it would work. That would carry over to 2024. Unfortunately for them, it did not. And really, unfortunately for all of us, because it sticks us with Donald Trump, and that is, I don't think we can overstate the danger of a fascist wannabe autocrat who now is coming into a term that many of the things that prevented him from realizing those ambitions the first time are not in place anymore to stop him the second time. Again, that's stuff you can see in my other pieces. But we have to unify around this idea, and that doesn't mean we have to all agree. It doesn't mean that, and I think we should hold this very closely. It doesn't mean that we have to work on each other's issues in the same way. We have to be in solidarity with all the other movements. We can pick and choose, but presumably none of us want to stand alone. I think that's kind of the point. We come into this and we come together. And we need a broad progressive strategy that brings all the various groups that work on whatever it may be: Black lives, Palestine, LGBTQIA rights, women's rights, reproductive freedoms, immigration, all the different issues that are around us, brings the major and minor, brings all of the groups, the grassroots groups, the advocacy groups, the lobbying groups, all of them come together and strategize and figure out how can we work together, because this has to be about changing our thinking. We cannot afford to continue to have this notion that it is our way or the highway. Each individual sector has, unfortunately, valid reasons for coming to that conclusion. How many times have civil rights groups, anti-racist groups, especially ones that are led by people of color, counted on their white allies, and when the heat, got turned up, their white allies weren't there. How many times have we seen, reactionary state or corporate or whatever forces find ways to drive divisive wedges between us because we're already in some tension with each other? That all comes out of binary thinking. That all comes out of thinking, well, I'm sacrificing the way I really want to do things in order to be part of this coalition. No, it needs to be both and thinking. We need nonprofits. We need lobbying groups. We need advocacy groups. We need grassroots activism. It all needs to come together, and they don't have to always agree. And I think this is really the big thing. What they do need to do is strategize with each other. Okay, this group, this sector is doing a thing. I don't think it's the greatest strategy. I don't think it's the wisest thing. Okay, I need to adapt my strategy for the fact that they're going to go ahead and do it. Okay, I need to think about how I'm going to move forward with my strategy, given their strategy, and think about how do I do it without undermining either one of us. We need to come together. None of this is easy. None of it's perfect. There are times it won't work so well. But we need to remain committed to that sort of unity and that sort of both and strategizing. And I think the fundamental way this plays out is we need to think about how do we really build the progressive movement. And there's basically two more or less two options. I hate to go back to binary thinking, but within those two options, there are so many different potential strategies that it'll feel like more than two options. So one is, of course, trying to work in the Democratic Party, and reform it. That's not a totally hopeless thing. We've seen the obstacles; they are significant and huge. We know the entrenched leadership. We know how completely beholden to oligarchs, to big money, to corporations that they are. We know how reluctant they are to change. We know how they still are dominated by white supremacy, even though they may have the appearance of diversity. Nonetheless, it's a viable option. It's actually a lot easier, given the country we live in the United States. It's actually a lot easier than creating a viable third party. So that's one option. Another option is, again, a viable third party. If we want a viable third party, does that mean we build the Greens? Does that mean we um, try and build another party from the ground up? Because for whatever reason we don't, the Greens isn't the right structure. Do we try and do that in coalition with other movements around the world and as political parties? I mean, I think it goes without saying we want to be in coalition with other advocates and grassroots groups around the world. Um, but so all of these are options, and they're not mutually exclusive. I think that's really the point I'm trying to make. Um, we pursue them all. We pursue the ones that are right because eventually, let's just say, um, what what comes out is, people work within the Green Party and build it up, and it really starts to build momentum, and it's on the ballot in all 50 states, and it starts seating people in city councils and state legislatures, and eventually the House of Representatives, and it's growing and growing, and it really becomes a viable national third party. I think what you'll find is that the people who are working within the Democratic Party are going to leave the Democratic Party and come into the Greens. People who are working on building another party will then, come into the. So, and if it works out that reforming the Democrats and putting a leadership in place that actually reflects the values and opinions of the rank and file of that party, I think if that works out, I think you'll find, again, yes, these third parties, people will start just all gravitating back into the Democratic Party. Basically, what I'm suggesting is if we pursue a both and model, and again, these are long term plans, over the long term, success will decide which is the most viable strategy. Um, I think if we're working together, we can actually do that sort of thing and do it in an atmosphere that can resist the divisive tactics that we will inevitably face. So this is what I'm suggesting. I think that and I have some other thoughts and frankly some plans of hoping to try and continue to get this conversation building over the course of the next month or two. Um, but but I'm just sort of putting it out there, and people should feel free to go to rethinkingforeignpolicy.org, where you will find a contact page where you can message me, and if you have thoughts about this, I'd love to hear them. If you have ideas of how we can really start to build this kind of movement again, let's get together, let's talk, let's expand the conversation, let's bring in more and more people. It's there. I think this is the moment, actually. This is the opportunity, because I think the failure of not only the Democrats, the failure of the Democrats, I think, is clear. I think anybody who can't see that is just clinging onto the available alternative to the Republicans, because they are either scared of change or unwilling to do the work of really building a viable alternative. But I think this is a moment. Um, And if we do nothing but try and sort of duck our heads and try to make it through the next 4 years of Trump, it won't be the next 4 years of Trump. We will see this country completely transform into an authoritarian state that will, and I think this is something we need to look at. Look what the Democrats and the Republicans in Congress, both parties have really been part of this over the past year. Look at what they've done to how they've attacked the protest movement in ways that I think are at least as vicious as things that we saw during the Vietnam era. I think you have to go back maybe 100 years to when the labor movement was first forming to see this level of violence that we're seeing now. The civil rights movement is another great example, but I think it's escalating, and I think it's going to escalate a lot more under Trump. If we just try to put our heads down and just try and weather that, it won't stop. It won't go away. 4 years from now, it will only continue to get worse. I think now is the time we have to really sit down and do this in a considered, measured way. And if it takes more time than we want it to take, that's just too bad. It's going to take as much time as it takes. And listening to Nina Simone recently singing Mississippi Goddamn, and that refrain where she talks about desegregation and other things that are going on, and the refrain behind her from the band is too slow. This has always been a problem. It's always been a tension. And it's always also been something that the establishment, if you want to use that word, exploits. Because we know people are dying, people are suffering. We say, well, look, we can't afford to embark on a years long project. Well, the fact that we can and that we haven't done it is why it's still continuing. So that's what it takes. It takes what it takes. That doesn't mean we stop helping people in the meantime, but it does mean that we have to be willing to let it take the time it takes. Shortcuts have a way of collapsing things. So we need to do this deliberately. We need to do this as a movement. We need to do this in terms of building a movement and building a political party. And I think at this moment teaches us nothing else. It teaches us that we need to do that and need to start on it now. So thanks for listening. Hope this is giving people some sense of how we move forward. I should also mention another great way to do this that we can all do is wherever we're working, if we are part of working for a traditional company, pushing for the unions and moving that process forward. More unions, the more we can organize. That's a vehicle for organizing so many other things, or at least it can be. So with these thoughts, I'm leaving you for now, and we will talk more. And we're going to find ways to come out of this very, very scary and negative, dark period stronger than ever. I really do believe that. So again, if you can donate, help support this work, it's mitchellplutnik.substack.com. You can contact me through rethinkingforeignpolicy.org, and just keep plugging away, folks. We're going to be okay.